case we have never met, I'm Michael Price, and I want to help you succeed in growing your business.
Today is May 22nd, and I'm Nancy, your co-host.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm Michael Price, your host.
Right now, the most powerful mechanism protecting small businesses in the multi-billion-dollar federal marketplace isn't actually a law at all.
Yeah, which is kind of wild to think about.
It really is. I mean, it is just a regulation. With, one sweep of an executive pen during a routine deregulatory cleanup, it could just vanish completely.
Poof.
Gone.
Exactly. So imagine you're building this massive, highly complex infrastructure project, right? Your blueprints are perfect, your materials are top tier, and you are totally ready to build.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
But you are constructing this entirely over an active fault line. On land, you only have a handshake agreement to use.
Oh, wow, yeah, that's not where you want to be putting your money.
No, definitely not. But that precarious position is exactly where small federal contractors find themselves today. And, well, that brings us to the mission of our deep dive today.
Right.
We are looking at a major legislative maneuver happening right now. This is May of 2026. That's designed to pour concrete into that fault line and secure the foundation of the small business industrial base. And the stakes here are incredibly high, for anyone operating in or even just looking to enter the federal supply chain.
Absolutely.
Our source material today is this recent client alert published by the Government Contracts Practice Group at the law firm Pillier Mazza.
A great firm.
Yeah, they do great work. And it details a piece of legislation known as H.R. 2804, or the Protecting Small Business Competitions Act of 2025. And the core focus of this bill is taking a foundational procurement concept and fundamentally changing its legal DNA to protect it from being erased.
So you already know the rule of two is the bedrock of small business set-asides.
Mm-hmm.
It's the requirement that contracting officers must restrict competition to small businesses if they reasonably expect two or more responsible small firms can do the job at a fair market price.
Right? It's the golden rule of GovCon.
Exactly. We don't need to rehash how critical that is for getting a foot in the door, but what most people don't realize is how terrifyingly vulnerable that rule is to current FR reform initiatives.
Yeah, the Federal Acquisition Regulation Reform.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Why is a rule that has been operating as a cornerstone of government purchasing for years suddenly sitting on the chopping block?
Well, the vulnerability stems directly from the hierarchy of federal rules.
Oh, okay.
The rule of two currently exists almost entirely on a regulatory basis.
Meaning it's not a hard law.
Right. It is embedded in the FER, which is essentially the operating manual for federal procurement, but it is not cemented into the foundational statutory law passed by Congress.
So it's just administrative procedure, basically.
Exactly. And whenever an administration, and honestly, this is regardless of political affiliation, decides to streamline government purchasing, they initiate FIR reform.
To cut red tape.
Yeah. They task the FR Council with hunting down and eliminating burdensome or non-statutory provisions, to speed up the acquisition process.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right? Because the rule of two isn't shielded by a direct statute. It's exposed to those deregulatory sweeps. It can be diluted, bypassed, or even eliminated without a single vote in Congress.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
Doesn't cementing this into statute make the government, dangerously inflexible?
How so?
Well, say a national security crisis hits or a massive public health emergency breaks out. Federal agencies need speed above all else, right?
Sure, yeah.
So if we lock the rule of two permanently into the Small Business Act, aren't we hamstringing the government's ability to just bypass the set-aside quotas and buy what it needs immediately from massive conglomerates who already have the infrastructure in place?
That is a really fair point. And honestly, that specific friction efficiency versus equity is the defining tension of all federal procurement. However, bypassing small businesses for the sake of immediate speed creates a massive hidden fragility in the system over the long term.
Interesting. How does it do that?
Well, if contracting officers constantly take the path of least resistance by awarding contracts to a handful of massive multi-billion-dollar prime contractors, you inadvertently create supply chain choke points.
Mm-hmm. Oh, because everything is funneled through just a few huge companies.
Exactly. H.R. 2804 is arguing that preserving a diverse ecosystem of capable, agile small businesses is actually a matter of national resilience.
Right, because if one of those massive primes goes down, you're not left scrambling.
Precisely. The goal is to ensure that the immediate desire for a fast procurement doesn't destroy the long-term health of the industrial base.
Okay, so it's the difference between having a handshake agreement with your landlord that your rent won't go up versus having rent control written permanently into your actual lease agreement.
I love that analogy. Yes.
The handshake relies entirely on the current mood of the landlord, or in this case, the current mood of the FR Council regarding deregulation. And HR 2804 is attempting to put that agreement into the lease.
That legal mechanism is precisely what the Pelear-Maza alert focuses on. By writing the rule of two directly into the Small Business Act, Congress removed the discretion from the regulatory agency.
They're locking it in.
Yeah, they are taking a vulnerable policy and upgrading it to an ironclad legal mandate.
Which brings us to the actual legislative momentum, because, an idea in Washington doesn't mean much until it survives a committee.
Very true.
And the momentum here is honestly staggering. The House Small Business Committee recently marked up and approved an amended version of HR 2804 with unanimous bipartisan alignment.
Yeah, that's wild.
The vote was 23 yes, 0 nay. In an era where getting a committee to agree on the color of the sky feels impossible.
Right.
A 23-0 vote signals that protecting this specific access point for small businesses is viewed as universally critical.
It really does. But unanimous committee votes are rare, and they also kind of mask the intense negotiations happening beneath the surface.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, Pillar-Matt's attorneys highlight a highly consequential detail in their alert. During that committee process, Ranking Member Nydia Velázquez introduced an amendment that drastically limits the scope of the legislation.
Drastically limits it?
The amendment explicitly dictates that the statutory rule of two will not apply to task orders and delivery orders.
Wait, I have to push back on the logic of that amendment.
I figured you might.
I mean, task and delivery orders aren't just minor administrative paperwork. They represent billions and billions of dollars in federal spending every single year.
Oh, absolutely. Huge amounts of money.
So if the entire underlying philosophy of HR 2804 is to guarantee small businesses their rightful seat at the table, why would a unanimous committee intentionally carve out some of the most lucrative acquisition vehicles in the government?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah. Doesn't that actively shrink the pie for the exact people this bill is supposed to protect?
What's fascinating here is that the Velázquez Amendment exposes the sheer mechanical difficulty of modernizing federal procurement law.
Okay, walk me through that.
To understand why this carve-out exists, you have to look at how agencies actually buy things today. They rarely issue standalone contracts for every single need. Instead, they rely heavily on indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts, or IDIQs. These are massive overarching master contracts where an agency pre-approves a pool of vendors.
Got it.
When a specific need arises, the agency simply drops a task order to that pre-approved pool.
So the IDIQ is the highway, and the task orders are the individual cars driving on it.
That is an excellent way to visualize it, yes.
And the agency builds the highway once, which takes a massive amount of time and compliance work. But once it's built, the cars can move incredibly fast.
Exactly. The primary value of an IDIQ is speed. A full and open competitive contract can take 12 to 18 months to award.
Which is an eternity.
Right. But a task order against an existing IDIQ can be awarded in weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay. I see the difference.
So the intense debate driving the Velázquez Amendment is whether forcing contracting officers to conduct a full rule of two market research sweep for every single individual task order would completely break the speed and utility of those master vehicles.
So if a contracting officer wants to buy like $50,000 worth of specialized IT equipment using a delivery order.
Right.
Forcing them to pause, analyze the market, and formally justify whether two small businesses could do it at a fair price suddenly turns a 2-week process back into a 6-month headache.
Exactly. The fear is that the administrative burden would grind the system to a halt.
That makes a lot of sense from the agency's perspective.
It does. The amendment signals a compromise. Protect the rule of two at the overarching foundational contract level, but allow agencies the flexibility and speed they need when issuing the rapid-fire task orders beneath it.
Gotcha.
It's a calculated concession to keep the bill moving forward.
But the House isn't operating in a vacuum, right? Which means this compromise is about to collide with a very different perspective.
Oh, definitely.
There is companion legislation pending over in the Senate, Senate Bill 2656, and the Senate version handles this exact mechanical tension completely differently.
The divergence is significant. Unlike the amended House version, S 2656 currently would apply the rule of two strictly to task orders and delivery orders.
Oh, wow. So no carve-out at all.
Nope, the Senate bill prioritizes maximum small business access over the potential administrative friction of those complex acquisition vehicles.
So we are looking at a classic legislative conflict.
Absolutely.
If both the House and the Senate manage to pass their respective bills, we are heading straight for a massive reconciliation battle.
It's going to be intense.
Industry groups, prime contractors, and small businesses are going to be fighting tooth and nail over exactly how far this legal protection extends into those multi-billion-dollar IDQ pools.
Yeah, the Pillar Romassa alert makes it clear that the final scope of this law is still highly fluid. The legislative sausage is very much still being made.
As they say.
And the discrepancy between the House and Senate approaches guarantees heavy negotiations in the coming months.
So that tension over the scope of the bill directly feeds into the real-world impact for the listener. Let's bring this out of the halls of Congress and into the boardroom of a small business.
Okay, let's do it.
Say you are running a boutique cybersecurity firm or, I don't know, an innovative logistics startup. You are looking at the federal marketplace right now. What does this shift from a vulnerable regulation to an ironclad statute actually mean for your decision to jump into the arena?
Well, for a firm new to federal contracting, this legislation addresses the single highest barrier to entry,
which is
the risk calculus regarding upfront capital. Participating in the federal marketplace requires an enormous initial investment.
Oh, for sure.
You have to implement DCAA compliant accounting systems, you have to invest in specialized proposal writers, and you often have to navigate complex security clearances long before you ever see a single dollar of revenue.
Which can take months, sometimes years.
Exactly. It's a massive drain on resources.
Here's where it gets really interesting because the Pillar and Matt's attorneys point out that codifying the rule of two doesn't actually change the daily mechanics of how a set-aside bid works. Like, if you bid on a contract today versus after this bill passes, the paperwork looks exactly the same.
The forms don't change.
Right. But the bill fundamentally alters the psychological and financial risk of entering the market by providing one critical element: immense predictability.
And predictability dictates capital flow.
Exactly.
If you are a small business owner mapping out a 3-year growth strategy, you cannot confidently invest millions of dollars into federal compliance infrastructure if the mechanism guaranteeing your access to contracts could be wiped out by next year's deregulatory sweep.
It's just too risky.
It is. The uncertainty forces innovative small firms to look at the government market, decide the shifting sands are too dangerous, and deploy their capital into the commercial sector instead.
But if H.R. 2804 passes, the ground hardens. You look at the landscape and know that Congress has legally mandated your seat at the table. If you can prove you are capable and you have at least one competitor to ensure a fair market price, the government is legally obligated to carve out space for you.
And that statutory guarantee is the ultimate incentive to take the leap and invest in federal capabilities.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that individual decision you make to participate triggers a vital macro-level effect.
It does. Increasing the sheer volume of small contractors actively participating in the federal marketplace is the only way to genuinely strengthen the national industrial base.
Let's pull that thread because the phrase strengthening the industrial base gets thrown around constantly in procurement circles, but it rarely gets explained.
It's a huge buzzword.
Right. How does ensuring a $5 million contract goes to a small tech firm instead of a $50 billion aerospace giant actually make the country stronger?
Consider the structural foundation of a massive bridge. If the entire weight of that bridge rests on just 2 or 3 colossal monolithic pillars, the structure appears incredibly strong.
Sure, because the pillars are huge.
Right, but it is secretly highly fragile. If a structural failure, a cyber attack, or a financial collapse compromises just one of those pillars, the entire bridge falls.
Wow, yeah.
And for decades, federal procurement has trended toward relying on a shrinking pool of massive prime contractors,
which creates devastating supply chain choke points.
Yeah.
If the government relies entirely on 3 conglomerates for all of its advanced defense logistics, and one of them suffers a massive data breach.
Which happens.
Exactly. Then the government's operational capability is paralyzed because there is no agile alternative waiting in the wings.
Furthermore, when monopolies form, the lack of aggressive competition inevitably drives up costs for the taxpayer.
Oh, because they know they're the only game in town.
Right? And it stifles the incentive to innovate. The massive prime contractors no longer have to fight for the work.
That makes total sense.
H.R. 2804 utilizes the statutory rule of two to build a different kind of foundation, one supported by thousands of distributed specialized supports.
So lots of small pillars instead of 3 giant ones.
Exactly. A highly populated federal marketplace featuring a continuous influx of hungry, agile small businesses ensures constant competition, prevents monopoly leverage, and forces legacy contractors to actually innovate.
So what does this all mean? If we distill the complex legal analysis from the Pillar Romanza alert down to its core takeaways for you, the listener.
Let's break it down.
First, the rule of two is not just a polite suggestion. It is the vital mechanism that guarantees small businesses meaningful access to the federal marketplace.
Number one takeaway right there.
Second, because it currently only exists as a regulation, it is dangerously exposed to deregulatory sweeps. H.R. 2804 aims to solve that by elevating the rule into an ironclad federal statute, incentivizing new firms to invest the necessary capital to compete.
And finally, while the 23-0 bipartisan committee vote shows massive momentum, the battle is far from over. The Velasquez Amendment carving out task and delivery orders combined with the conflicting Senate bill means the exact scope of this protection is still being fiercely debated.
So it's not a done deal yet?
Not at all. The small business community cannot afford to be passive. Active engagement in this legislative process is required to ensure that the final reconciled bill actually delivers the comprehensive protection it promises.
The blueprints for a more secure industrial base are drawn, but the concrete hasn't been poured yet. Getting this legislation signed into law changes the entire risk calculus for small businesses ready to scale.
And this raises an important question that extends far beyond just government contracting.
Oh, like what?
Well, we have spent this deep dive exploring how the constant threat of regulatory shifts stifles participation, and how introducing statutory predictability is the critical key to enticing small, innovative players to enter a highly complex market.
Right, it's the only way to get them to build the infrastructure.
Exactly. It forces you to wonder how this logic might apply to other critical sectors.
That's a great point.
If locking the rules in stone is the secret catalyst for breaking up monopolies and strengthening the federal supply chain, how might implementing similar ironclad statutory guarantees of predictability unlock innovation elsewhere?
Oh, wow.
What would happen if we offered that exact same durable legal certainty to small disruptors navigating the highly volatile, heavily regulated worlds of artificial intelligence, renewable energy, or emerging healthcare tech?
That would be game-changing.
Could guaranteed predictability be the ultimate tool for sparking a renaissance of small business innovation across the entire economy?
It is a profound thought. If you stop changing the rules in the middle of the game, you might just find out that a whole lot more innovators are actually willing to sit down at the table and play.
Thank you for watching. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor and sharing your product or service with the world, reach out to MarketUS.com. You can schedule a session to discover how we can work together. See you soon.